Hey guys, what is up? AwesomeTheSauce here. Hope you guys are having a great day and welcome to another insane video. Today we're going to be talking about a change that is not yet completely done, but there's been a lot of talk about it and a lot of people wanted me to make a video on. Basically, there's been talk about a potential new update to Wiz, especially PvP, where shadow hits can no longer be enchanted. So we're talking about Gaze, we're talking about Worm, we're talking about the new ones, the 6 pips, the 7 pip spells, the Mockenspiels of the world. So these will no longer be able to be solar surged. And the reasoning behind that is to make it so that some schools can't do an obscene amount of damage. Now, I wanted to talk about this because I see this in a lot of ways as very negative, but I can also see a couple of positives. So I thought I would review what a change like that would do and what else would also need to be changed for it to be a good change for the game. This might sound like a weird way and a very roundabout way to reason that this might be a good change, but I think if they were to make shadow hits unenchantable, I really think at the end of the day, the schools that would benefit the most are the offensive schools. We're talking about Fire, we're talking about Storm, we're talking about Myth. And why do I say that? Because, I mean, one, let's say that you do hit a high-end S'mores, right? It's still doing a lot of damage. And even, let's say even you do hit 1,000, right? 1,000 is not small, you feel me? So I feel like the fact that, you know, hitting with bubble control or a buff or two even, it can make something like S'mores so good still that I feel like such a change would definitely affect schools that really do need to enchant their shads to do damage. And who knows, maybe fewer people will go warded to Fire and Myth if they think that the S'mores isn't going to do so much that they can do other things instead. So overall, it could actually work against people that ward in order to win or ward out of necessity. It could also like increase that sense of school identity with shads, because I feel like the thing that really happened with shads that a lot of people hate is that it kind of ruins school identity. Everyone uses their shad hit to do damage, right? So the whole idea of overtiming into a shad, which is a critique that I've heard a lot, it's very, very common. If you have an overtime on your school, chances are your best PvP strat is just to blade twice, and then you just go for an overtime into a shad. There's no shield or even weaknesses that can do anything about it. If they do 2 sets of weaknesses, you could always empower, you know, you could always pack a couple of empowers. So the only real counter to overtime into shads, which are weaknesses, can be removed for 0 pips. So as long as you have enough counters to enough weaknesses, you're going to be able to pull that combo off, which is why it's so good at max level PvP. So yes, it could make offensive schools a little bit better because of their school identity, and it could also create an alternative to just overtiming into a shad. These are definitely good things that could happen because shads would not be enchanted. In fact, I honestly think that shadow enhanced hits and limiting their use in general, whether it's limiting copies or limiting the ability to enchant, it could probably do a lot of good for the game. But that's not why I'm making this video. I think you might have guessed that there's a lot of bad things that can happen if you cannot enchant your shad. Let's talk about Ice, for example. If you cannot enchant a bomb, this is going to be one of the worst hits in the game, because literally, why would you ever use 5 pips for this when you could shield into an enchanted, I don't know, like Colossus, I guess that's the next best thing, right? You would always do more damage if you keep a shield on and do this. And honestly, there are people that are probably going to say that's a good thing. My only issue is, if you have to always keep a shield up in order to do a solid hit, what's going to end up happening for schools that are weaker, like Ice, like Life, they're always just going to shield over and over again, because they're almost never justified sending out a shad that does something offensive and defensive at the same time, because the damage is so low. Don't get me wrong, I would love to see spells like Colossus, spells like King Art, spells like Lord of Winter, spells like, you know, even Scion used a lot more outside of all the schools. But because there's a 30-minute timer, what's going to end up happening is that people like Ice Wizards, they're really only going to ever shield and frostbite. That is what's going to end up happening. Same with even Death, that has very, very weak shadow hits. You're going to end up seeing a situation where, because you're so not justified in doing a shad hit, you're almost always just going to shield and overtime, instead of an overtime into a shad meta. What's going to probably end up happening is just a shield into an overtime meta. If you're a school that's so weak that you cannot hit someone to the point with overtimes that you kill them, you'll see a really bad situation where it's just shield overtime, and it'll always be a Diego call if you're a defensive enough school. There's a lot of reasons why I say this, but I think if you really want proof as to why that's definitely going to be a thing, just look no further than Life, right? I mean, they're the school without the overtime into a shad combo, and that basically makes their shads pretty bad, right? You're going to be hitting into shields a lot. It's basically a good representation of what happens in the game when shad hits are not as useful. Life right now is probably the most timer-oriented school. What you end up having to do is just keep a shield up and just spam hits. And since they don't have an overtime, you see this with Luminous, but every other school, their literal similar thing is just to keep shields up, keep a brace up, and just overtime over and over again. So yes, it's a good thing that some schools, like offensive schools, will have a good like school identity type situation come through, but I see this like a no shadow enchant type update. I see that as a recipe for disaster, because all that's going to be is a bunch of death, balance, life, and ice wizards just shielding and overtiming as much as possible until Diego. That brings us to the real point, I guess, of this video. What are they going to do about Diego with an update that slows down the meta that much? I think we can all agree that not being able to enchant shads could do a lot of stuff that's good for the game, right? People might use spells that aren't shads for the most of their damage. You might see life wizards using things like, you know, Centaur maybe, right? You might see things like King Art come through, maybe more spiny sword plays. As good as that is, when you do have two defensive schools, you already see it going to timer. Now, with more pips needed in order to do damage because shads just aren't as good, you'll see that come through even more. I've heard this idea of a chess timer, which is basically the idea that once you run out of time, you lose, which means you're going to have to pick cards fast, and they're going to have to be good moves. So yes, it is a cool concept. I'm very nervous about people just spam healing and spam shielding or spam weaknessing as quickly as possible to game the timer. So there has to be a way to deal with that. But who knows? Maybe if they want to slow down the meta to the point and also penalize you with time and a chess timer with super defensive moves like shields and heals, maybe we could have a system that works. I think that is what would be the best system for no enchants on shads. You would need a timer system that has no AI saying who played better, but literally if you run out of time, you lose. And the more you shield, the more you weakness, and the more you heal, the less time that you have. So it kind of gives you an incentive to play offensively instead of super defensively, because it will be a defensive meta if it's current rules, but you can't enchant shad. I guess what I'm trying to say is, yes, not enchanting shads could have a lot of good things, but under the current timer, you would need to change something for it to be a fair and justified change. One thing that absolutely needs to be looked at, whether it's soon or whenever they make this change, if it is a thing, is the fact that you can still mana burn, and nothing is changed by the fact that you cannot enchant shads, right? This spell is already broken AF if you just want to play for Diego, but it would be even more broken if you need to get high pips in order to do the same damage that you can currently do with shad, right? Like a Storm that used to be able to enchant a Rusalka to do damage now has to literally wait for 5 rounds in order to Storm Owl to do the same damage. That's just literally asking to get mana burn by balance. So if they do make it so that you cannot enchant shads, I think they need to also look at mana burn. I think this is a one spell that absolutely needs to be looked at. Maybe it could be in the same class of spells that affect a chess timer, like a weakness or a shield or a heal. Maybe this could be seen as a super defensive move. But what I think they should do is either make it so you cannot pip conserve it, or make it so that it's 6 pips instead of 5 pips. Because right now, 5 pips with a pip conserve literally makes this literal 3-pip thing. It makes it so easy for you to gain pips on your opponent while mana burning. It's definitely a very interesting thing to think about. I mean, I don't know if y'all watched, but the Sauce and Staff Showdown that we had literally featured games where the rules were a little bit different than they currently are, but basically we did not allow shadow enhanced hits, but we literally allowed every other thing, right? We didn't even cap mana burn. The only difference between that rule set and the rule set right now is that we put resist at much lower. So by using different caps, we basically made for an offensive meta. So maybe part of the answer is also to make it so that the damage cutoff is maybe a little bit higher and the resist cutoff is a little bit lower. They could choose either of them, you feel me? I feel like right now, the only reason the damage cutoff at 125 damage feels so stupid is because of shad. So maybe they could change that a little bit, and they could create a dynamic little system. I think there's a lot of answers there that could be very exciting. The point of this video, I guess, is to keep the whole no enchant shad thing in the back of y'all's mind if you're PvP, if you like PvPing and that kind of stuff, and hopefully it doesn't shouldn't frighten you too much, because hopefully it'll be accompanied by other changes, like changes to damage and resist, changes to Diego, changes to mana burn. If they do things like that, then maybe we could actually see something where shads aren't just needed by every single school in order to do damage, and we see a lot of these high pip spells come out to play. It could be very exciting, and honestly, it could mean more spells and Wiz than we've ever seen before. It could also be the worst meta ever, where people just shield into the overtime and they shield into the overtime. So it depends on how they do this. This could be really awful or really good. I don't know. That's just my honest take on what could be a potential update. This is just something that I've heard rumblings about in chat when I'm streaming. I've seen other people talk about it. I've seen devs talk about it. So I thought I'd give my 2 cents on how this could be a good or a bad thing. Let me know what y'all's opinions are. Would you like to see a meta without enchants on shads? What do you think that means for Shrike as well? Could people just not really need Shrike? Or are people going to use Shrike more because they're not using their shads for hits? Who knows what could happen, y'all? As always, let me know what you think. Drop a like if you enjoyed. Leave a sub if you're new. And as always, there's tons of links in the description, including my Twitch, my Twitter, my Discord, my Instagram, and of course my Patreon. And as always, if somebody hasn't told they're awesome today, they doing something wrong. So stay awesome. And yeah, y'all.